So today we see some of the most impressive and highly paid athletes in the world playing field sports. It's where most of the money seems to be. It's definitely where most of the viewer interest is. A lot of these field sports, whether it be rugby, American football, soccer, hockey, are phenomenally physically demanding, and we see some amazing feats of human performance, whether that be massive feats of strength during scrummaging or big tackles, or incredible feats of speed and agility in soccer or hockey or even rugby or something like that. We see these feats being put down to both a combination of massive genetic potential, great training and coaching, but also the work they're doing in the gym. And what now we're going to talk about is the best exercises that they're going to be able to do in the gym.
So we'll often see kind of a mismatch of S&C work in the gym. So you'll see players doing a lot of right stuff, and very often you'll see players doing a lot of wrong stuff. Now, of course, this isn't their problem or this isn't their fault per se. This is, of course, the responsibility of their strength and conditioning coach. So we'll see things like NFL players power cleaning 190 kilos or cleaning 190 kilos as late teens or early 20s. We'll see them front squatting 200 kilos for reps. Then we'll also see things like players trying to recreate their sport in the gym, like weighted kicks, or, for example, you'll see people trying to recreate a bow and arrow on rings while suspended sideways on a box. We'll see a lot of ludicrous things. So if you forgot about the sport for a minute and didn't look for a huge sports specificity for training, and you didn't try and recreate the sport in your gym, if you just got an individual and you said, how can I make this individual's quads as strong as possible, or this individual's hip extensors as strong as possible, you wouldn't try and recreate a random sport, because you would think, okay, that's not the most useful aspect here. What you would do is look for the best possible exercise to increase the strength and power and contractile speeds of this particular muscle group. And so we're going to run through 5 of our favorite or most productive exercises or lifts in the gym for athletes, field sport athletes, in the off season. So first on our list, but maybe in no particular order, is back squats. So this is always going to be on the list for us especially. So high bar back squats for field sport athletes are phenomenally useful. It is essentially accomplishing training all of the limbs of all of the muscles of the lower body. So we get hip extensors, or knee extensors, hip extensors, hip flexors. So a lot of productive muscles needed in field sports, and we get these through quite a useful manner, because you are maintaining postural integrity and you're getting the benefit from high bar squats. You're getting to use quite a significant amount of weight, but still in a relatively safe manner if you're squatting productively. So the high bar squat can be very, very safe if done right, and in that safe manner you can reach weights that are close to maybe double body weight for some of these athletes, or depending on how powerful they are. For example, you might see rugby players box squatting to maybe below parallel. You'll hear stories of them squatting 280, 300 kilos. We've had pro rugby players squatting 200 kilos for reps, absolutely no trouble at 110, 115 kilo body weight. And so you'll get this very high weight that's still very, very productive for that athlete, because you just get a lot of benefits from this sheer weight, especially in those sports which need a lot of force production, and those heavier weights really allow us to exploit that force production capability.
The other massive advantage of the back squat is that you gain a lot of control and you gain a lot of stability in the hips, the knees and the ankles. So aside from all the massive performance benefits that a back squat's going to give you, not only will you be able to sprint faster, hit stronger, accelerate more aggressively, but you'll also have less likelihood of injury if you are stronger and more stable in the squat. For most people, as Gareth was saying, that kind of double body weight is the real aim. A lot of the time you just want to focus on bumping that top end number up. You shouldn't really worry about rep maxes or anything else. You should just be moving from periods of high volume to periods of lower volume and trying to get that 1RM as high as you can possibly get it.
So number 2 on our list, we have Romanian deadlifts. Now, as mentioned before, Romanian deadlifts were originally used for lower back training in weightlifting, so they're looking for near full knee extension and the back take as much load as possible. Now obviously these still train your hip extensors, but the primary goal for these was the lower back. Now lower back is obviously very, very useful for all sports, but when we were talking about RDLs, we're meaning basically stiff-legged deadlifts or RDLs, so primarily a hamstring focused movement. One thing all field sports have in common is that people are trying to run as fast as possible, change its direction as fast as possible, and a huge amount of hamstring injuries. So what we want to do is move to a hamstring through a full range of motion with a significant amount of weight, or as much weight as you can manage, while still performing the exercise in a safe and productive manner. And the RDL slash hybrid stiff-legged deadlift is one of these very, very, very useful exercises that can be done to quite high weights in a safe manner. No, we're always concerned about, are we protecting the athlete and making sure that this athlete in his off season isn't going to get injured, but still get the most bang for his buck from these exercises.
I think for most field sports athletes, you're going to see the best kind of results if you just deadlift the barbell up off the ground, or you could take it off blocks or take it off a squat rack or something like that, and then over the course of a number of weeks or a number of months or a number of training cycles, you'll gradually get towards just doing full stiff-legged deadlifts or full RDLs off the ground itself. But for most people in most sporting contexts, you're not going to have that kind of hamstring or hip flexibility to go straight into a from the floor RDL or from the floor stiff-legged deadlift. Up next on the list then we have floor press. So I know some people might disagree with that. For us, definitely the floor press has much more application to field sports. It's a much better tool or better scalpel to be using than something like a bench press or even a close grip bench press. The reason floor press is so valuable is you can bump that top end number up very, very quickly. You also have a range of motion that's slightly more applicable to most of the kind of fendings or even most of the arm movements during tackles. So whether you're shooting your arms around to get a bind in a tackle, whether you're shooting for a bind while scrummaging, that range of motion of the elbow being in the same plane as the back of your back and pressing forward is much more applicable than bringing it all the way down onto your chest, which is a range of motion a lot of kind of larger or more physical athletes won't have.
So one of the benefits then from the floor press we see compared to the bench press is a lot of times the more physical field sport athletes will have beat up shoulders, so they'll have multiple sessions where they're being hit, they're hitting someone or they're hitting the ground, or all three of these in one session, even training sessions happening multiple times a week. And field sport athletes' shoulders just aren't able for the beating bench press you might get. So a lot of you might, for example, watching this might be powerlifters, or you might have done a lot of benching and not played field sports. You might be like, benching's not that bad for your shoulders and it gets a bad rap, which we may or may not agree with. But for our field sport athletes, again, you're trying to balance that. What are they doing in their sport? What's their state, their body, and what's the most productive exercise they can get that will still help them as much as possible? And the floor press often wins out over the bench press. Like Fitz said, you can really get into repping your 1 rep max bench press for several reps across the set for not a massive amount of fatigue compared to the bench when it comes to our field sports athletes.
Up next is probably something every athlete should be doing, but especially for field sports athletes, is the hamstring Nordics or Nordic Falls or whatever you want to call them. This is essentially just an eccentric hamstring loading exercise. You want to make sure your hips are pressed forward. You want to make sure the person who's holding your heels or the implement that's holding your heels is nice and solid in the ground, so you're not going to be having your heels moving up and down as you're going through it. But purely due to the sheer amount of hamstring tears we see in field sports athletes, every single year on every single team you see people popping hamstrings, straining hamstrings, getting full hamstring tears, and these really are going to be the best way, or they'll be the initial starting block of you becoming a bit more resilient to those hamstring tears and pops.
So you'll actually see the popularity of hamstring or Nordic Falls increasing a lot. If you watch a lot of the All Blacks videos, you'll see a lot of them doing full range of motion Nordic Falls without assistant, which is incredibly impressive. Like, some of these players are pushing 90, 100, 110 kilos depending on their position. So the benefit of the Nordic Falls is fantastic. The main thing you need to be worried about though when you're doing Nordic Falls is that you don't have to be able to do a full one just yet. So don't be discouraged if you can't do a full Nordic Fall, or if you're 120 kilos, it is a little bit harder for you, even when you take into like relative strength. That for that 70 kilo guy, it's going to be a little bit easier for him to increase his ability to do a full one. So what you're really looking for is the fall as slow as possible, and you want to catch yourself as late as possible before you kind of release. And when you're doing a Nordic Fall, you'll know what that means. So you're just holding on with your hamstrings for as long as possible. You're not leant forward with your upper body. You're keeping this as straight as possible, and you're just letting your hamstrings take your load as much as you possibly can for as long as you can, all the way into the ground until you have to let go, and then you just gently push out your hands. You can push yourself back up as well to complete the motion if you want, and then each time you're just literally looking to get a little bit further as the weeks go on, and eventually you'll be able to get to the end where then you can contract and pull yourself back up. We don't really recommend the use of bands for assisted loading like we wouldn't use bands for assisted pull-ups. It doesn't really ever seem to translate over into getting someone to do a full Nordic. These either very, very slow eccentric Nordics or Better yet, if you've time as well in your training, is to add a separate session where you do pauses just before your catch point for the Nordic. So you figure out that point where you let go, then you hold on to it just for a few seconds, and then you fall, and you repeat that for 4 or 5 sessions. These can be quite fatiguing, so I wouldn't really recommend these for the on season for our field athletes, but in the off season they're a great addition to the slow eccentrics.
Last exercise, and it's probably the exercise you would have expected to have first on this list, is the power clean, or the hang power clean, or whatever derivation of the power clean you want. But it's certainly synonymous with out of season or off season athletes. Certainly if you watch a lot of NFL players, or you watch a lot of even high school or football or college level football, you'll see them doing really heavy power cleans with varying degrees of technical prowess in the gym. But certainly the power clean is phenomenally useful for almost all field sports athletes. I know for our soccer players all the way through to Australian football players, rugby players and American football players, they'll all have power cleans towards the end of their off season when they're in a kind of mainly power output focused period of training.
So the variation of your power clean doesn't really matter. I'm very happy to do it from blocks. I'm very happy for someone to do it from the floor. I'm very happy for someone to do it from the low hang. Very happy for someone to do it from the high hang. It honestly doesn't matter if you do a combination of these. I don't think the full clean is very, very useful, or more useful than the power clean in the position of field sport athletes. I think a combination of power cleans plus heavy front squats are much more productive, because you can do more weight, more repetitions in a safer manner again. So that's the big trade-off there. Full cleans are a lot harder to learn. It's a lot harder to get the mobility. Like, it's very rare we'll see pro rugby players with the possibility of doing a full power clean, especially with those shoulders, the front rack, all of those things that are just too difficult to get. These kind of power cleans are much more productive, just where it's very, very fast, not a lot of contact, and just catching the barbell with feet at a reasonable shoulder width stance and no wider. You can replace these with pulls as well if you do them explosive enough. I find though that athletes who are able to do power cleans will do the pulls correctly, but unfortunately athletes who can't do the pulls correctly can't do power cleans correctly. So it's usually a result of being able to power clean. So really try come in with the power cleans first, and then use the pulls as a secondary exercise for that. Try not to make the pulls as your main exercise. We often see people butchering those unless you have someone pretty competent helping you with them. Now, we will be doing a separate video on standards for each of these individual sports and what we think would be useful for like squat, bench, deadlifts, power clean, press and stuff like that, of just relative body weight. We'll go through the different sports. We won't cover this in this video, so stay tuned for that one.
If you are an athlete coming into an off-season period of training, we have off-season strength and hypertrophy blocks. These are phenomenally good if you need to get a bit bigger, a bit stronger and a bit more powerful in your off-season. There are 4 sessions per week, 4 weeks per block, and we have multiple blocks, so you could run them for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months or 4 months. Just go to the link below and it'll bring you to the website.